Now, where we left off in the last session, we were talking about keyframing, and we're talking about the software that will interpolate the frames between two keyframes, and this process repeats over and over and over again. So our job is only to create the keyframes, and the job of the application is to create the subframes or to interpolate the frames between our keyframes. Now, that's not to say that keyframing is easy. As we go through here, I'm gonna describe to you some of the methods, the tricks, I guess you could call them tricks, that I use. But I don't want to lose you, so we are going to take time and we're going to talk about this navigation maker window so that you understand what that thing is doing and what your tool set is. And then I think in time, as I describe to you the tips and the techniques and that I use for keyframing, I think you'll really be able to put them into practice quite well. Let's do something a little simpler and talk about the animation maker window. I'll just kind of show you around a bit, and we can kind of let our brains relax a little bit. So at the very top here, you have the keyframe stack. I like to call it a stack. The only way that you can navigate in this stack is with this, they call it a scroll bar. I personally think that it's kind of clunky. I don't like it. As a software developer myself, I would not have chosen this method, or at least I would not have forced the user to live with this one method of navigation. All right, I believe that we've got we might, that's it. That's all you got. It's all you got. That's it. That is your keyframe navigation method. If I click on this frame, I'm clicking. I don't go anywhere. I don't go anywhere back here. I'm clicking on this frame number one, keyframe number one, and that's not going anywhere. So the only option you have for navigating this keyframe stack is with this slide bar, and that's it. That's what you got. All right. Now, this button right here called Processings, we're going to talk about that a little later when it comes to fine-tuning these keyframes. Moving on with our overview now. It says here, on inserting a new keyframe, subframes to render between 50. That's where this 50 came from. All right? That's where the 50 came from. If I had put in there 499, then this, when I put the keyframe in, this would have automatically have been set to 499. So this is your default for the subframes to render between. That's your default, and that number is going to wind up being up here. That's the number of keyframes. That's the number of frames that the software is going to make when you say go in between your keyframes. In this case, 499. But let's just knock it back down to 50. I can override this value at any time. I can put whatever I want in there, and it does not change that value. This value right here is, we'll call it a default that will be used when you insert a new keyframe. Moving on. Go to next keyframe. When that is turned on, what that does is it, watch the top here. Watch the keyframe stack. With this option enabled, I'm going to put a keyframe in. All right, and you notice here that the software automatically navigated to the next keyframe spot. I'm just going to take that out and I'm going to prove it to you. All right, now we're on keyframe number 3. I'm going to uncheck this and I'm going to now insert a keyframe. You notice that the keyframe stack stayed on the keyframe number 3. So it's as simple as that. All that really does is say, look, you know, when the user puts a new keyframe in there, position yourself to the next empty keyframe slot. So that's all that means. Okay, yeah, normally you want to keep this right on 3D. Obviously, you're working in a 3D environment. You don't have to. There are certain scenarios in which you are working in kind of a 2D environment, but defaults to 3D, just leave it on there. And that is going to be the method that the animation maker will utilize when it renders your subframes. All right. Now over here, let's go over here. This is the animation size. It's kind of mislabeled. It's not the animation size. It is actually the resolution of your subframes. All right, now I don't have to keep describing what a subframe is, right? That's the interpolated frames between keyframes. That's a subframe. All right, so that is the resolution of your subframes. Now you'll notice here that also as part of this panel here, or section, you also have an anti-aliasing of 2. Now I can make that anti-aliasing of 1, or I can make it, well, 3. 3 is my max. Now what that's saying is, let me put it back to 2 for you. What that's saying is that when the animation maker creates the subframes, it's actually going to draw the image at 960 frames resolution, but it's going to do that twice. All right, so the whole idea is when you draw an image and then you draw it again, things like diagonal lines, all right, will in a digital, especially a lower resolution digital graphic, your diagonal lines tend to be stair-stepped. All right, jagged, okay, usually impacts diagonal lines. If you set an anti-aliasing here, that stair-stepping effect is reduced. But it does mean that that subframe was created twice within the software and then of course married together, and the whole idea is that you get a more accurate image with less of that stair-stepping effect in diagonal lines. And certainly in an environment like this, we have a lot of diagonal lines. Got a lot of them. They're all over the place. All right. So typically you want to have the anti-aliasing turned on so that you have a better render of the subframes. We'll demonstrate that a little later on. Okay, so subframe interpolation. You got linear and you got quadratic, Bezier. I can't think of a use case where you're going to do linear. I really can't. Let me see if I can illustrate what this might mean. Let's say, well, okay, we don't need this anymore. Let's throw that away. All right, so let's. All right, let's say that. All right, now you're in a 3D environment now, X, Y, and Z. Let's say that you're going to interpolate between this location and this location and that location. That's three keyframes right there. I probably should have just done lines, but those are keyframes. because I wanted to show you what a Bezier kind of a interpolation looks like. Now first let's do linear. So linear, it's going to go from this position to that position, and it's obviously it's going to be creating subframes all in between here. Then it's going to go from this keyframe, we'll call it keyframe number 2, to keyframe number 3, like that. Keyframe, subframes, as usual. All right, and what you get with something like that is you tend to get, if you're say flying through a scene and you're linear and you do a turn, let's say let's see if I can do this. All right, let's say you're going like this, keyframe, and this keyframe says, okay, you're going to turn. All of a sudden, boom, you turn, and it basically removes any of the fine movement that you would have in your scene. If you're just moving forward on the z-axis, you're just moving forward on the z-axis from this keyframe to that keyframe, doesn't matter, because you're only going from keyframe 1 to 2, no big deal. That it doesn't matter if it's linear or quadratic, it doesn't matter. But if you're moving along on one axis and then you have a keyframe move it on another axis, you don't want What you want is woo. That's what you want. Now that's Bezier. So if I tell it to look, move on the Bezier, you would have, let's see if I can do this now, you would have something like this. It would go like that, and like this, and like that, and like that. Boy, that's terrible drawing. I got to work on that. But anyway, that is that's your Bezier, and that's why you typically are always going to want it on here, with the exception that you actually want those sudden movements through your scene, which I can't imagine why you would, but that's the way it is. All right, out of time on this session. Let's pick this up again in the next session, and I'll see you there.